for commentary, Professor Anderson.
I once met Aptheker, actually, I must forgive me that, in a grotty communist party building north of Union Square in the mid-1970s. I was interviewing him because I was writing this really rather peculiar theoreticist thesis, master's thesis on the CP-USA analysis of the New Deal, of which there wasn't much. New Deal, not so much analysis. And so in the course of this conversation, we came to talk about what he did himself in the 1930s, and he said, he was talking about when he was in Birmingham, Alabama, and he made one comment that I've never forgotten. He said, mobilizing or organizing blacks in Birmingham, Alabama was more dangerous than mobilizing and organizing Jews in Berlin at the same time. And I thought about that, and it's slightly hyperbolic, but I don't think by much. I don't think by much, anyway. That's my Herbert Aptheker memory. I'm very much in sympathy with Lydia's general argument, and I think the end of the paper, very stimulating paper, about public opinion being the ultimate court of appeal here is, I think, very well taken. What I want to do in these very, couple of minutes that I've got is just to broaden the argument slightly. Because in the paper it's very much geared to a discussion of his argument about the partisans of 1963. This is a man who lived a very long time. And he had lots of different arguments at different times. But he tended to have two enemies. All of his arguments are about, the friend-enemy distinction, but his own enmity, so to speak. What is that about? Well, he's got two enemies. One is Wilson, and one is Lenin. Right? In the 1920s, when he begins to theorize law, international law, and foreign relations in general, his target is Wilson. His target is Wilson in the following sense. It's a critique of liberalism. It's a critique of the 19th century notion that we all have the same interest, and that there is such a thing called humanity, and there is such a thing called humanity on which you can base international relations. Not a good idea, says Schmidt. It's a kind of hypocritical position that inevitably occludes the real nature of politics, which is about friend and enemy distinctions, and therefore it neutralizes the whole concept of politics. Moreover, and more importantly, if you're going to be opposed to humanity as embodied in the League of Nations and Woodrow Wilson, the person, then you're by definition inhuman or criminal, certainly absolutely devoid of all legitimacy. Right? So what the reactionary Catholic Carl Schmitt really likes about the 19th century, early 19th century, the 18th century, is that it has a kind of, if you will, not pacified notion of war, but at least it entails the conception of legitimacy of the opponent. Right? It's like a medieval duel. I kill you, but nevertheless I, legitimate you. Killing in the Wilsonian context is by definition inhuman and extreme if you're not signed up on the Wilsonian progress and program. Fast forward 1963, earlier than that too, but theorized in the 1963 book about partisans. Partisans do not recognize the old order either. In fact, they don't recognize the Wilsonian order either, in point of fact. And because, as Lydia quite eloquently laid out, they don't recognize this, they can't actually have the status of competence in the ordinary sense. But this is what the Bush administration likes about Schmitt. There's something really wacko about Dick Cheney's staff reading Carl Schmitt. But what they like about Schmitt, in a very superficial sense, is that A, he talks about partisans, that is to say terrorists in our present kind of context, in these terms. That is to say, it seems to allow them for, because partisans don't recognize, therefore we don't recognize therefore we can do what we want. That is very useful. B, it kind of takes the position that the ultimate sovereign has to be the power that has the right to decide on the exception. So what Bush does in the post-9/11 period is to say that old distinctions, borders, rules and regulations no longer apply. We have to have the right, the international community as incarnated in me, George W. Bush, has to have the right to counteract terrorism on the same grounds as they counteract us, namely deterritorialize strikes wherever it has to happen, or wherever they have to happen. Right? No regard for sovereignty, rules and regulations as commonly understood. So those are the two aspects that they like. However, of course, there is a Schmittian critique of that Schmittian position as appropriated by Dick Cheney, and that critique is to say that, well, what you've done is kind of neo-Wilsonian reincarnation, which is to say you've said that none of these people have any legitimacy or rights within a kind of friend-enemy distinction. They're not really enemies. They are, in fact, criminals by definition. And that is to say, we, the international community / George W. Bush, have the right to decide who is, in fact, beyond this distinction. So that's why I would say there is a kind of neo-Schmittian critique of the neo-Wilsonian Schmidt that we find in George W. Bush.